Hello everyone, it's Aaron here. Now obviously we are in lockdown, it's really frustrating. Let's be honest, it is really frustrating. But there are people around Australia and around the rest of the world who have really been significantly impacted by this virus. So it would be awesome if you could keep those people in your prayers. And hopefully this outbreak is really short-lived, and so hopefully we are back together in the flesh really soon. That would be awesome. But the purpose of this video is just to continue our devotional series. We have been looking at Hebrews chapter 11, and we have been talking about the heroes of the faith. So we've had two goals by looking at Hebrews chapter 11. And the first one is so that we actually learn a little bit more about what faith actually is. And the second goal is so that we can actually see how faith is actually put into practice in everyday life. So those have been our two goals from going through the heroes of the faith. And in this video, we're going to continue to look at some of the heroes of the faith by looking at the person of Noah. Now, I'm sure you already know a little bit about Noah, but I'd love it if you'd follow along with me as I read Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So Noah is pretty well known, pardon the pun, but the Noah and the Ark it's a really popular children's bedtime story, particularly in Christian households. So you probably already know a little bit about his story. But please allow me to just give you a little bit of a refresher about the story of Noah. So not long after the fall in the Garden of Eden, a few generations pass, God is looking at the world and the people have actually turned their backs on him. Some of the words that are used to describe the human race are wicked, corrupt, and even violent. And so God is grieved. He's really grieved with the state of the world. And he actually wants to reset everything, to press refresh or restart on the whole system. And so his plan is to flood the earth and to destroy the population of the world, but to preserve the human race through one family, which is Noah's family. And so he speaks to Noah and he instructs him to build a large boat or what's known as the ark. And his instruction is to bring his family onto the ark and to bring all the animals of the world onto the ark as well. And so Noah is obedient to God. He follows this instruction. And what God says takes place. The earth is flooded. Floodwaters cover the face of the earth and rain comes down. And it's a restart. It's a refresh that takes place. And Hebrews chapter 11 verse 7 draws our attention to the person of Noah and the faith that he displays. And that's what we're going to consider in this devotion. So first of all, when we think about this instruction that God has given to Noah, we can't help but be struck by how seemingly ridiculous it is for God to give this instruction to Noah. You've got to understand that he's been going about his life. Yes, we're told that he walked with God. But all of a sudden, out of the blue, he hears from God, build an end of the world boat because I'm going to flood this place. That is an absolutely outrageous thing for Noah to hear from God. Absolutely outrageous. And so it would be the same as if God said that to you today. If God said to you, go and start constructing a massive big end of the world boat on the Oval at Lockyer District. Everybody would think you are absolutely crazy. And so this is what Noah is told, and this is kind of the mental, psychological hurdle that he has to overcome in order to practice his faith. But this hurdle is magnified, it's increased by the social factor. So the Bible doesn't go into too much detail on this, but we can assume that if the world is wicked and Noah has actually been walking with God and is being faithful to God in building the ark, then anybody who is in his vicinity who sees him building this ark is actually going to be giving him a really hard time. They're going to be opposing him for doing this. Maybe they make fun of him. Maybe they ridicule him. It's not much of a stretch. We make fun of people when they hoard toilet paper during a lockdown. But in this case, there definitely would have been a lot of social opposition that Noah actually stood against. But the key here is actually highlighted in this verse where it talks about the reverent fear that Noah has of God. You see, he was more afraid of what God thought of him than he was of what these other people actually thought of him. And this stems from his faith. He has a reverent fear of God. This doesn't mean that he was terrified of God. It doesn't mean that he was horrified, like a horror movie type fear of God, but rather a healthy fear, an acknowledgement that God is literally the creator of the universe. He has all power. He has all knowledge. He is in complete control. And so this is an acknowledgement of his status before God. It's an honor. I want to honor you, God, because I know who you truly are. And I'm a little bit afraid. And I'm more afraid of these of you than what I am of these people over here and what they think. And so that actually leads Noah to do this crazy thing of building this great big boat. And the verse tells us as well that through his actions, he actually becomes an heir of righteousness that comes through faith. Now, in order for us to understand this, we actually have to understand what an heir actually is. Now, an heir is somebody who inherits something. Maybe somebody passes away and then they inherit all of that person's possessions. So they don't actually own anything. They don't actually earn anything. It's literally just something that comes to them through their position. And this is the case with Noah. He inherits righteousness that comes through faith. And this is a different sort of righteousness to a righteousness that comes through the law. So being righteous according to the law is actually keeping God's law and doing everything that God commands perfectly. Now Noah, of course, wasn't righteous according to the law. If we look at his life, he did wrong things, he sinned, and he was unrighteous. So Noah was unrighteous according to the law, but according to faith, he was considered righteous. Now the way this works is actually that Jesus came along and he was perfectly righteous according to the law. And because he was the Son of God, by his death and his resurrection, everybody who puts their faith in him, everybody who believes in Jesus is actually able to be forgiven of their sins, forgiven of their unrighteousness, and they are able to be considered righteous through their faith. They inherit righteousness. And this is what happened to Noah. Even though he had never heard the name of Jesus Christ, he believed in God and he trusted in God. And the work that Jesus was going to do in the future covered Noah all the way back in the past. And so even though he never saw it in his lifetime, through his faith, he was actually able to inherit this right standing, this righteousness before God. So that's what Noah was able to receive as a reward of his righteousness. And the really powerful thing as well is actually that we can receive this same inheritance as well. So all of us, according to Romans 3, have fallen short of the glory of God. We were meant to be his image bearers, but we failed. Instead of seeking after him, we sought our own glory. This is the human condition. We have all done wrong according to God. But through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and through his righteousness, anybody who believes in Jesus, anybody who puts their faith in him, can actually have forgiveness from their sins, and they can be considered righteous through faith. They can be considered right before God, right in God's eyes. And this is what we can have when we believe in Jesus Christ. If we believe in him, all our sin is washed away. It's all done away with. God sees us as his children. This is a really incredible reality of the gospel. When we believe in Jesus, we are forgiven from our sins and we are reconciled to God. What an amazing thing that we can experience through Jesus Christ and what he has done. Now, before we finish up our video, I have one more encouragement for us from the story of Noah. And this is the way that Noah stood up in the face of social opposition. You see, as I've sort of outlined already, to build an end of the world boat would have encouraged a lot of social opposition. People would have jeered him, they would have mocked him, and they would have given him a really hard time. But the example that Noah sets is actually of standing fast and firm in his faith and trusting in God and being more afraid of what God thinks of him than what all these other people think of him instead. And this is the example which we must be encouraged by. We were talking about this last week in the boys group, but God actually calls us to be Christians, not just on a Friday night at youth group or on a Sunday morning at our church services, but actually he calls us to be Christians in every aspect of our life. But at our schools, there's not really a whole lot of Christians. It's between 1% and 5% of our local school that are people that actually believe in Jesus Christ. And even in our social and cultural world, some of the Christian beliefs are not popular anymore. They're actually considered to be offensive. And so it's not cool to be a Christian. It's a really hard thing for you young people to actually be Christians in this world. But my challenge is to actually look to the example of Noah. Because Noah was more afraid of God than he was of anybody else. A healthy fear, mind you. He was afraid of God in a healthy manner. But this is what he acted out of, his faith in God and his fear of God, and not his fear of other people. It doesn't say that he wasn't afraid of other people, but he was more afraid of God. And so that's a question which I want to ask all of us, myself included. Who are we more afraid of? Are we more afraid of what God thinks of us? Or are we more afraid of what everybody else thinks of us, our family, our friends, and our school teachers? That's a really challenging question, I think. Something for you guys to think about and something for me to think about as well. So hopefully you have been challenged and encouraged by this video, and I look forward to catching up with you soon or online somehow. God bless you guys.